record. All right. It's going live. Hi, everybody. My name is Liz Huck. I'm the Executive Director for Oakland Rising. Appreciate you joining us tonight for this live event and our town hall for redistricting. We are in the last 2 weeks of this process here in Oakland. It is not only happening in Oakland, but it is happening nationally. It's happening at the state, it's happening in our county. But in Oakland, we have until December 31st to land on maps. And we know that last night, the Redistricting Commission here in Oakland decided on 2 final maps that they will be voting on actually on December 30th to meet that December 31st deadline. So I'm so grateful to Lily Gangas, one of the commissioners for the Oakland Redistricting Commission, to join us tonight to talk through the craziness that happened last night. And really, I think it would be great if we did a little recap of like what brought us here, right? So that folks know and understand what that means. And then we'll get into some mapping and we'll look at some maps that we have. And then talk a little bit through why Oakland Rising might be leaning towards one map or over another, and some of our own data that we are going to be sharing out. We were supposed to share that out last night to the commission. We were on the agenda to do so, but declined to actually share out our data in hopes that the public would see that actually we weren't influencing or the commissioners unduly, given that we did have a particular stance and were advocating for very specific communities of interest as well as particular maps. So with Lily here at the from the commission, Commissioner Gangas, let's be really formal. I want to just thank you for joining us tonight, Lily. And you're on mute, but maybe you could just give us a quick introduction to yourself and how you joined the commission.
Definitely. Hellos to everyone. My name's Lily Gangas. I'm the chair of the commission. I'm ending the process, but overall for the commission, we all wanted to make sure that everyone had an opportunity to be to lead the process. And so for me personally, I've been living in Oakland for a little bit over 5.5, almost 6 years in the district D3. And I really got tapped into what this process is through the Latino Community Foundation. And so they were more or less trying to encourage everyone across California to take a more proactive role. And so I applied, and before I knew it, here I am. And so for the folks who may not be aware, there's an application process, and the first 4 or 5 commissioners were actually selected randomly. And I happened to be one of those. And then we helped select the remainder commissioners that make the complete set of 15 members, where you have 13 that are voting and then 2 that are alternates. And I think one of the things that's important for folks, especially for myself, being here in Oakland and being able to just think about the impact of this work, and in my private work at the Caper Center, where I focus a lot on increasing opportunities, specifically opportunities for communities of color, Black, Latinx, and Indigenous, to have upward economic mobility through technology, and just seeing how fast technology since the pandemic has just become a necessity. Mm-hmm. I think for me, being also able to look at what does the future of Oakland look like in the next, not just a few years coming out of the pandemic, but like what's the next 10 years look like. And so this process is really providing us that opportunity to take a look at, reflect on the last 10 years, how much Oakland has changed. For the first time is actually Latinx is the largest population. We know that the Black population has decreased. And so those were things that considerations that we wanted to make sure reflecting on what happened, why did that take place? As we look forward for the current data that we have, what is the opportunity here for Oakland to really be really rethinking how is this current line serving Oakland with a sense of equity? Is it really serving? And I think some of the maps that we've been able to share out started that conversation. And so the big thing, I think I would say at a recap for the folks who missed the 7-hour meeting yesterday, I'll recap it for you. 2 maps.
Just real quick though, Lily, just to ground us, actually, I want to take a quick step back. I realized that I failed to do this piece around accessibility justice. So one of the things that when we first did one of our town halls, we heard back from community members that said, can you actually describe what's on the screen? So I'm going to invite you to describe yourself. And then also you want to slow down your pace of your speaking a little bit. I know we like to talk really fast, and so we just want to just slow it down a little bit so that we can ensure that our interpreters can interpret and our captioner can also get everything down for folks who for language and accessibility justice. So I'll model. I'm Liz. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm an East Asian woman, and I have short asymmetrical hair, looks like a bob, and then I have dark blue cat eye glasses, freckles, and some white big hoops. I'm wearing a denim jean shirt with a cardigan sweater over it. In my background, I have a lot of art that's displayed in my dining room area. So I will describe the ASL interpreter that is on screen currently. She's a white woman with red hair, and she's wearing a black sweater. She has a white background, and in the corner has a plant coming out of, it looks like a palm plant. So I'll invite you, Lily, to also share what you look like.
Thank you so much, Liz. So I have my hair up in a side ponytail. It's a mix of, you can see my roots with my highlights. But I'm also wearing a scarf that's a little bit gold and a sweater that's tan. And then my background is a little bit of it's a blur, but you can see a little bit of my plants and some of the beige, the walls as well in the back. And I'm a Latina woman. I'm wearing red lipstick, and I'm going to try to also not talk too fast since I
I know how it is though. When we get excited, we just start speaking faster, and then we don't breathe, and then so it took us a while to actually get to where we got last night, right? Because I think this is actually the first public commission in Oakland on redistricting. Previously, it had been the last redistricting process in 2010 actually happened with City Council. And then in 2014, there was a ballot measure that Oakland Rising was a part of helping to pass to create a public commission. So everybody, that all 15, even including the 2 alternates and the 13 official commissioners, are all just volunteering their time. They're residents of Oakland at varying degrees in terms of economics and racially and where they live across the city, right? There is a higher emphasis, I believe, of folks that are living in the flatlands, but in general, it's a really nice spread across the city of who's representing. And I have to say, Lily, that the commission has been really great at listening to the public in a way that I think before with City Council, what would it would look like is then the public would have to really advocate hard and push, and then it would just be up to the city council member to decide for themselves. And of course, every commissioner can do that as well, but the process has been fairly transparent, right? And it's gotten to a place where it's like, who's on the commission? What does the commission do? What does equity look like? What's the process here on out? When's the census data coming? And then it's not coming, and then it didn't come, and then it finally came in like end of August, right? And
Mhm.
so it really jump started the process in September, where people began to look at the data. There was a outreach coordinator that was hired, as well as consultants for the mapping as well, who all just do, this is their jam. They do redistricting maps all over the country. And so really looking at how to do that more equitably. And so we jumped into the process around October, where towards the end of October, we started as Oakland Rising doing our own town halls. And we started to see the outreach coordinators reaching out into the community at events and all kinds of things. And we saw an increase of participation at the commission meetings.
Right.
And do you know the exact number of how many people the outreach coordinators have reached out to Oakland?
Yeah, that's a good question. The last update, I believe they were getting close to 3,000, and it's a mix of organizations. So they might be, of EDs or members of different organizations that then push it out. We will be getting an updated amount. So there was a newsletter, from bottoms up. Everything was pretty grassroots.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, Liz, because the census data was so late, there was also this period of time where we didn't have anything to look at, even though the census data was released. So that really puts us at like really October, when we started looking at the data to start making any sense of what are these maps, what are the criteria. So it's been really a truncated effort of about less than 3 months. And so it's been a huge ramp up. However, I do think that as we're right at the peak, right? This is exactly where we've done as much as we can. And so for the public that may not be aware, because of the delays in the census data, and then how much, additional opportunities we needed to create to making sure that the Oaklanders were aware. And I know that that's been a big issue. Folks are just learning about it. And to some degree, that's the part that we wanted to address as much as we could. And so we actually, I believe it was our beginning of November, end of October meetings, where we decided to double the public meeting schedule that was originally stated. We
Right.
started holding workshops on the weekend, about 2 workshops per week on top of those meetings.
Mhm.
And then we made sure that we would show up in person to the different outreach events across Oakland. And so it was a very significant scale up from the
And
group.
even that, the additional meetings and the additional workshops was at the request of the public, right?
That's right.
Oakland Rising with Asian Law Caucus and League of Women Voters and the ACLU put a letter like saying, because representing all these communities that we represent, saying this is not enough, right? Like where we were at, and the commission heard it immediately. People called in and said, this is not enough, right? And so we need more meetings. And imagine, y'all, that this is completely volunteer, right? So the commission meetings almost tripling in October, November, and December. And so this was this is part of where I was thinking, I've heard from people is like, this is crazy mess. And I was like, when racial, economic, environmental justice, equity work takes work, it gets messy. And sometimes when we are actually imagining a new world, imagining a different way of functioning, it's messy. And I think, though, because the transparency and the process, as much as possible, allowed the public input, and the
Mhm.
commissioners actually heard it. So then there was like proposals and proposals and proposals of maps. Like, I ran into a friend and they were like, how are you doing? And the other friend answered, she's just thinking maps, 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 maps. I was like, that's right, all I see are maps. I can imagine what you see, really. But so we went through what, A, B, C, D, then E, F, G, H, and then I, J, K, L, no, I, J, K, right? And so those got cut down and then cut down and cut down. And the latter maps were like, they were
Based on
variations of
preference.
the earlier maps, right? Because then it was more community input and then there was new maps, right?
Great.
As a result of that. And then as of December 8th, they landed on FI, which were very similar. Like I was based on F, and H and K was based off of H. And viscerally, the very big distinction between the two being F and I were slightly closer to what we have currently. And H and K, H and K were this brand new hills only kind of district. And then last night there was, the last meeting, and then there was more cutting down, there was more input and criteria that was brought in, and then landed on looking at particular maps last night. And so where did we land last night?
For the folks, we landed on two maps called F3, which is based on map F with the additional modifications. And some of those modifications I can share. We're also, of course, based on all the public comment that we received during the meetings, that we received through community members actually drawing maps under RELF and submitting it through districting, through maps that were physically also created through emails and surveys. And so we made sure that we were going through all the submitted comments in any type of form. So then that way we can make sure that we were prioritizing. And so not this meeting, but the meeting before, we decided to say, okay, what are the big themes that are the must-haves that we want to see across the maps? And so map F,
which I'm showing now. This is map F.
And map F, as you see, was also based on, it's the based off map D with additional community input. And what we did, this F, we looked at a version of called F2 that eventually became F3, which is what you'll all be able to review as the final map, one of the final map options. And what we wanted to do was very straightforward in making sure that we were not diluting any communities' plurality as far as making sure that we were looking at the CBAP data.
Could you say what those are, plurality and CVAP data?
Sure. And so for the, when you take a look at the population, right? And so since the census data that came out, that provided us just general population numbers of increase. And so,
right.
So that's more or less the population of what are just by numbers, right? The majority of the population. And we did see overall in all of California, but also Oakland, just an increase in the Latinx population in general. But we also wanted to making sure that we're also looking at the citizen voting age population by race and ethnicity. And so that's one of the important parts, because we want to make sure that we are protecting voter protection, right? So making sure that what we've seen in other cities and other states taking place, right? We see the headlines of the gerrymandering to move and put certain groups together for political reasons. That's something that we don't do, right? Especially in this process, we're making sure that we're protecting and preserving. And so there are specific charter criteria, there are laws at the federal level, at the state level that we follow to make sure that that is staying in place. And so through the software that the consultant has, we are able to look at that data real time to making sure that we're ensuring that. And so that means that as these new lines are being shifted and redrawn, we're taking a look at that to making sure that groups are not being diluted. And so that was one of an important part for what we're doing. And I'm sure we'll go a little bit, once we have the actual maps, we can show the exact data.
Yeah.
On top of that, we also wanted to, I think it's very, I also feel it's a very, I'm happy with these two maps, I'm gonna say, because we also are helping remove this, at least partially in the West Oakland side, the fact that that whole above and below the 580, right? And so both maps include being able to extend West Oakland north of the 580 to making sure that we are including Mosswood Park as a community of interest. So I think that that is a big signal for hopefully a positive step forward, because we know the redlining that's taking place and the role that these freeways took, right, from a historical perspective.
That's right.
And so I think that these two maps helps us both take a step forward to, as you said, to reimagine that.
Yeah.
We also wanted to look at looking at how Fruitvale has been extended, making sure that we are keeping the San Antonio community together, which is one of the most diverse across, as we said, the data, but also making sure that we are not diluting the Latinx vote. And looking at also, there were a lot of different other options, but these were the ones that we prioritized, making sure that the Coliseum and its neighboring community were not split up, whether that's in the current district that they're in or in a new one. That's the options that you'll see in the maps, but we wanted to make sure they were together.
Mhm.
And we got that feedback directly from the community. Also looking at Millsmont and Mills College staying together, making sure that
and including like moving that also above the 580. And
Yeah.
I want to just emphasize again that this isn't, like the commissioners just didn't like decide, oh, the 580 is some of the freeway lines, and how it's been used is a demarcation of inequity and disenfranchisement. But that the public was actually coming in and saying a lot of this. And so a lot of even our COIs, our communities of interest that we had advocated for, was like pushing it above the 580 or including these communities and ensuring that. I think part of the West Oakland one too, I wanted to make sure was that we included Westlake Middle School into what was considered West Oakland, right?
Yes, definitely. And that's the other part that is in real time, we were able to layer the maps of the school. So we had representatives of schools, organizations that are representing students join us. And so, yeah, so we added that layer to making sure that we were not splitting any type of students or districts. And so that was basically one of the big criteria last night that helped us get to these two maps.
Yeah.
And so both of the maps don't separate or don't break out schools that aren't in their current state.
Mhm.
And I think that's, again, to your point, that community input in all forms is loud and clear. And so we wanted to make sure. And other parts as well that I think is important, as we get into the flatland, especially around Liberation Park, some of the Eastmont Mall, Seminary Plaza, those were things that on both maps are also there. And so I think that this, once you all get to see the maps, I think I'm excited, to be honest. Like I'm really excited to see what even if it's a step one into what reimagining Oakland looks like, but also just the opportunity to get past some of the history, right, that's divided, and also challenge the notion of the status quo. I mean, these are maps for the next 10 years. And so there is a lot of opportunity for Oakland, especially where a lot of the population is right now, to feel better represented. And so hopefully, and be heard, right? And so I think that's why some of the outreach activities that we've been doing was prioritized in some of those areas where it's harder for folks, like based on some of the voting, right? Like where are folks not coming out, and let's go and find out and have events there. So all that to say, that was map F, and then map K is a little bit of a still has the I guess it's partial hills, because we did go up a little bit on some of the D7. So it's a not necessarily an all hills map, but it's a partial. And I think K3 has all the same criteria as map F.
Yeah.
With, I would say, some very nuanced areas around what do you see here in the pink area, and I would say around the lake. For
Right.
folks who are also seeing this for the first time, a lot of population is in this map, for example, in the C3, with the high rises, the space, so, and then also the lake. So these are very concentrated areas that made it challenging to even be more like out of the box thinking, right? With some of these.
So just to pause, I think what we didn't also mention in this process is that when looking at it, you can't have population density be larger than another district. It has to be fairly even across the board, between 5 to 10%, leaning more close to the 5%, right, difference, in order to allow representation to be even across the city. And so as you can see, like D4 in this map on H that I'm projecting on the screen, and I'll pause here. I realize I didn't mention to describe this. So it is a map of Oakland with bold lines of the proposed district lines, and layered underneath are colors, various colors from our old map. So not old, but our current district lines. So you can see where some of the changes were happening as a result of initial community input. And then this last great push of folks really kind of took us to where we're going to have new maps. And those maps, because they only were decided and created last night, because they did it live mapping session with the topographer, that those won't come out till Thursday. And then the public will have 2 weeks to review those maps.
Right.
And so as we listened to the process, there was a real push. And for Oakland Rising, you know, between F and H, I mean, F and K, sorry, that I think has to be the one thing that really was really telling to see as a part of this process, was that those considerations that actually the commission heard almost every single feedback and input and comments and COIs, and really attempted to bring that type of equity and conversation into the maps. And so even though K and F, as you can see, K is different because it does on the eastern border of the city, which is in the hills. There's one large D4 district.
Mm-hmm.
And in Plan F, though, across the hills, we have A1, D4, F6, and G7 that all still have a portion of the hills, you know, from 580 above 13 freeway. So just so the folks know the difference. But irregardless, even if Plan F, which is closer to our current district lines, actually challenges a lot of preconceptions about it and where inequity lies. Definitely Plan K is the plan that pushes us to a whole nother way of thinking and being in Oakland. And so I just wanted to make sure that folks understood that as well. So Lily, do you want to talk a little bit about then where those maps really, I mean, you spoke a little bit about some of those specifics of those criteria. But when you were listening to the public really speak about those asks, right, around the communities of interest, as a commissioner, looking and hearing that, what is something that like really stood out for you, and really thinking about like what that decision making process was for you to really push for particular criteria for those changes?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that question, because I think one of the challenges that we've had is that not everybody has had an opportunity to look at a little bit of the CBAP that I mentioned, the plurality, and seeing how the data looks on that end, especially when you take a like looking at it with an all hills, right,
Right.
map. And I think some folks naturally were it felt like it was a segregated map. But then when you look at the data and then you look at just how people have been voting and how they're being outreached, right? And I think is it working or not is the question. And so I think that in itself provided I think a conversation. And I think hopefully for the folks who have participated, and I know that yesterday we went into more depth in the meeting before as well, where we got to cover some of that. So I do think that the folks who wanted a little bit closer to what we have now moved a little bit closer to a map, a K, and then the folks who, were at the All Hills map moved a little bit toward closer together. So I do think it was a really insightful opportunity to just learn about the needs and the evolving needs, and what is the perception versus what is also the data showing us. And then also making sure that we're looking at data cautiously as well, right? Because it could also be used for different cases. And so making sure that also the different organizations had enough time to provide their input in a lot of different formats. So that's why we started looking more closely during the public meetings at the maps and redistrictor. We started discussing and bringing back comments that were submitted before, just to make sure to look at those recurring themes and making sure that not just the folks who were the loudest or always there were the ones being heard versus other ones. So we were trying to make sure we have a balanced approach to learning about that. But I would say that more in all, there were some common themes, and I think we were able to capture the big themes in both maps. As once you see the maps, you'll see definitely around the Fruitvale area. I would say around we did some
K3 and F3 are on Redistrictor now.
Oh, they're finally on. Okay.
So just to let the public know that Redistrictor is actually the tool that Redistricting Commission that we all were able to use. So if you actually, I'm going to show from the beginning. So this is the Redistricting Commission website. Can you see this? The Redistricting Commission website. And if you kind of scroll down, there was a draw and submit. We did a town hall on this where we actually drew some maps with both the executive director from MUA, Mujeres Unidas Activas, Juana Flores, and then Elena Serrano from Eastside Arts Alliance joined us to do some mapping together. But you can see here that all the maps that people had created were included here. And so some of the commissioners requested that the topographers, the consultants, actually put this here so that they can study the maps and get really deep, because some of the PDF files were sort of just flat and they couldn't see certain things. And so this was one way that they did it. So we get to actually look at it. So this is 3.
You can tell them the timestamp 108.
That's right. You can see when they did it too, right? So this is great. So as you can see here, they are not labeled A1, B2, C3, D4, E5, G6, F6, and G7, right? But maybe we'll just go by the colors here, because remembering those without the labels on here might be a little difficult. But regardless, this is F3, and this is what the commissioners really landed on. And as you can see here, on the right-hand side, shows you what we're naming plurality, which is sort of like what the population density looks like. And you can see it's very close. Everything across this is very close. And so is there anything that you wanted to point out very specific on this map that that would be helpful for folks?
Yeah, definitely. I think, like I mentioned, some of the West Oakland going above and making sure directly from public comment, right? We heard it in different formats, making sure that the schools were not also separated. And so for the folks who may be listening for the first time, we literally went block by block to making sure that we were not accidentally also letting the software do any type of funny thing. And so it was a little bit of a slow process, but we try to ensure that based on the public comment that we honored what was shared. And so I think that this I think for especially for West Oakland provides at least an opportunity to not feel always below the 580. I think it helps progress in that perspective.
Right. And so just so folks know, can you see my cursor here?
Yeah.
This right here is actually the 580 freeway. So there is some, as you can see here, some dipping above and below between this blue and the green. Blue being more like North Oakland and the green being more West Oakland, what we neighborhood-wise or areas of the city, right? Without getting into like very specific neighborhoods, but like generalized. Yeah, so that was one really big one, right? And just so folks remember too, as you can see here, this is Broadway. And on Broadway and around Broadway, and there has been quite a lot of high-rise developments that include huge density of people. Although right now there's not a lot of people living in them because there is a gluttony of at market rate housing, but and many of them sit empty. But you can imagine what that would mean then for this city council member or for the school district director, what that would mean in terms of density, like who they would have to advocate for or hear from in terms of the public. So this is one of the big changes here that we heard is that folks were pushing for an all hills. They were asking for more representation in and around Lake Merritt because it was sort of split, correct?
Right. I think that there was, as you see some of the northern part, right, the Lake Merritt, because of the population, as you mentioned,
Right.
we had to, do we keep Westlake schools together or do we take a dip on the other side? So we wanted to keep the schools together. And so that's why it looks in this format as well.
Right. So that change had to happen in order to keep the population density the same.
Correct.
And so this is probably one really big change because currently D3 and D2 kind of this D3 would share this side of the lake. It comes around the lake. And so this has D2 kind of going deeper into downtown and it still holds on to Chinatown and different parts, but there's some changes here right around the lake. And then we see here in, I just want to make sure you're good on time. Is this still okay? I know that you said you had to go at 6:30.
Yeah, it's okay. Definitely, especially for folks to fresh off the press to see the map.
Exciting. I feel like a data nerd. It's so great. This like really gets to that part of my soul. So as we can see here too, then one of the other changes was in this pink area and up here where we had the Laurel, the Diamond, and what would be considered Glenview. In previous maps, they were all stayed together and there were portions of it into this pink lower, what might be considered the Fruitvale district, right?
Mhm.
But in here, it looks like it's been moved into the hills in order to keep them together.
Right, and then I believe that this one also has the Fremont area. I'm not sure if it captures, because we had to, again, that was another also looking at the schools, making sure that they were kept together and that we did hear a certain public comment about making sure where Fremont and some of the other schools were there. And so, because this area is also very densely populated, as so it's maybe smaller, but it is, again, as Liz mentioned, because of the population, right? Um, that's why it's a little bit, it looks smaller than the other ones, but it's high population as well.
Right. And then we see here this purple, which we might consider D6 now, but this deep purple area that includes the Oakland Coliseum, the arena, and Eastmont Mall. One of the things that people were advocating for clearly was to have the Coliseum neighborhoods we were advocating from Seminary to 85th, from the water all the way to International, to be considered one community of interest. So there was some effort here to keep the Coliseum itself with the Lockwood and the Coliseum neighborhoods, which were adjoining here. But the neighborhoods sort of to the south of that, which would be deeper East Oakland. I know these directions are weird because we do it differently in Oakland, because that's how we are in Oakland and have always been. So, but this was an attempt to really get that COI together. But this was one of the maps that was sort of like, if we did this, then we would get there. And there was a lot of really nuanced moving.
Yeah, and if you can click, I think on the data layers, you can take a look at the CVAP, because with this map, I believe it increased the CVAP of the Black population in at least 2 districts. So there is part of that, and then so to some degree, I don't know if it could show some of it. Yeah. And I think if we compare, and once the PDF is also published, everyone will be able to see across all the groups a little bit more easy.
So
But
this
yeah.
is Black population. You can see this is the citizen voting age population for the Black population in Oakland. It's highly concentrated. This is very much the data that we would have shown as well. Here's the Asian population. It's more concentrated here in Chinatown, East Lake, and parts of San Antonio. San Antonio and Jingletown in this area is actually it's one of the most diverse parts of the city. And it's so interesting because it's actually right in the middle of the city.
Yeah.
And this says Hispanic, but we're speaking about the Latinx community voice. So
That's right.
going across the pink, purple, and aqua. I don't know what else color to call it. Yeah. And these other ones the populations are so small that I don't know if it would make any sense to show that.
Yeah, and the other part too is I believe that map F3 does keep the Asian population also in polarity. So making sure as you look at D2 that wasn't lost as well. And so we were making sure that no border dilution was taking place. And so we try to do as much as we can with some of the data, with some of the borders. And so that was also another part that we did have a lot of comments throughout the process as well, to making sure around D2, because it is not it's close in I would say like in E5, I think we've been able to get it a little bit higher up. But also this map just shows, it does, I would say that F3 does show increased CVAP for Black communities, and it keeps the Asian polarity intact as well. So those are some additional data points as well that once we get the maps where we can compare them all across, you'll be able to see those numbers a little bit better.
Yeah, so I want to encourage people, because this is here, like, don't mess with it, and try to change it or anything like that. But you can go on here and take a look at this data, go to the data layers and start to sort of see that breakdown in Oakland and how it works. And as you can see, Oakland is majority POC. 65% of our population is identifies as Asian, Black, or Latinx. And so just keep that in mind as we continue to move through this as well. All right, so this is F3, one of the things that will be voted on. And there will be another more detailed map, and all the data points will be put out per district similarly on that look like this, data points. You can see all this information here. So you can see that. The last one is, then I want to go back and just show, and this is actually the map that Oakland Rising is advocating for. And maybe after Commissioner Gongas leaves, I'll explain a little bit more why, or, so it doesn't seem like she's advocating for this. Is very clearly what Oakland Rising is advocating for, but there is some major changes here as well, right? We do have to take a deeper dive. I think we are, the maps just came out last night. So this looks more like what we want, but I think we need to take a deeper dive into what it is that we're looking at as well. But you can see here, there is some pretty big changes. The biggest being that there is a green map, all hills only, not almost all, goes up through, D6, out into deep east in the hills, as well as deep east. This is like Grass Valley area and Nolan Park area. And so is there anything that you'd like to point out more specifically here? I can see here that, again, we still have Mosswood Park and Westlake that's incorporated into West Oakland area.
That's right. Yeah. And so in both the West Oakland space map looks pretty similar. I think some of the parts that you'll see it's a little bit around. I think we did get it close to it as well from where the Lake Merritt is at.
Mm-hmm.
I think the part that you see here in the pink, the hot pink, is that's a little bit different than the other map, right? And so actually this map does increase, I think it keeps the Latinx vote. It doesn't dilute it, because that's one of the areas that we wanted to make sure as some of these borders were moving. So that's the Latinx CVAP stayed the same in E5, but also the Asian, this map also just provides also an increased CVAP for Asian community. And I believe it's 2 of the districts, so it does increase it a little bit more. I think one of the conversations that we were starting to have was also just the different groups within the Asian community, right? When we think of South Asian, we think of all the different, especially around, I would say, the pink and the purple area,
Mm-hmm.
the different community groups that are represented that sometimes in these data points, it just get all lumped in one, so you're not able to see.
Right.
But this map does actually provide some of that. And so that's a little bit of a difference here. And then we did, I believe that the Black CBAP did increase in this map as well. And so, and of course, the teal and the purple, those have been the majority is the Black population, and that doesn't change across both maps. But the who is like almost not the majority, but quite almost there. I think that's a little bit of the nuance with some of this F3 and K3. So definitely encourage folks to, once the data map and the PDF is there, to definitely compare both a little bit closer, because you'll see some of the nuances that come up, especially because the biggest delta between this and the other map is really that hot pink area. where a lot of the population right now is concentrated. And so one of the parts that was there was also making sure that the high schools again were not separated. And so you'll see a little bit of the Fremont area in the hot pink. And the big differences is also on the teal, the light blue. To Liz's point, it's not in all hills, but it still has a lot of the extension. But we did spend a good amount of time yesterday just making sure that the communities in the top part of the teal were not separated. And so literally block by block by block. So that's another key difference between this map and then the other map.
And one of the key differences also is that the Oakland Arena in this map, Oakland Coliseum, is in this teal area before it was in the purple. This continues to still sort of cut off the Lockwood and the Coliseum. It splits the Coliseum neighborhood, what we would consider Coliseum neighborhood, away from down the middle. It doesn't address that completely. One of the big concerns that was like the fight between D6 and D7 in terms of deciding where the Coliseum would lie was about economics. So sort of like who should hold that economic engine and who should be advocating for that. And, we had heard back from, Asian Pacific Environmental Network and the Communities for a Better Environment that are working on environmental justice and the impact of polluters, corporate polluters, right? And what would it mean for only one council member to have to deal with all of the corporate polluters? Felt heavy. It's not only them because, we have the port and we have other corporations that are doing that in West Oakland. And there is this whole area too, this is where Brooklyn Basin lies, which is a big new development. And as we think about towards the future, there will likely be a lot more development that could happen near the airport around, Martin Luther King Regional Shoreline, up against the 880 freeway, similarly to Brooklyn Basin that might be happening here in Oakland. So we also want to be mindful of that as well. So these are some considerations that we'll be making in deciding. Initially, it's sort of like, yeah, we want that all hills, district and map to be reflected of that. But then how does this actually impact our communities in the flatlands? I think is the most important piece. So
yeah, definitely between this and the other map, it's that pink, purple, and teal. So this is definitely all about the flatlands of the nuances. And so I think it is an important opportunity to really dig closer and be able to December 30th, join us for the calls to be able to say yes, this one, or no, that one, because by law, we have to vote on one specific map. And then we'll go from there. So
either way, we're going to see some big changes in terms of representation in Oakland. Just to let folks know too, that if there is a current city council member that gets district out of their current district, they do not lose their seat immediately. They stay in their seat until the next election for that seat, or if they give it up to run for another office. The other thing to note is that on the Redistricting Commission website, currently, I'm going to show you what it looks like right now. Currently, there is, let me share my screen. Currently, there is this provide input. It's like a survey. This survey will change as well, because it'll be like you can still provide input. It will go to all of the commissioners, but this will change to decide which map you prefer to get a survey. And this will also go to all of the commissioners. And okay, so the process now is that these new maps will get posted on the redistrict. It is on Redistrictor, which is the mapping tool, but the city will also put up the final district map proposals
Mhm.
on there, which is F3 and K3. And then you'll be able to get to see all of that data. And then we have 2 weeks. It's 2 weeks of advocating and emailing and showing up to December 30th, the last redistricting commission meeting, which will allow the commissioners to hear from the public on which map they prefer, and then the commissioners debating and deciding which map to land on. And we will step into the new year with brand new maps, y'all.
New maps for the next 10 years.
That will sit with us for the next 10 years. So yes. So thank you so much, Lily, for joining us to talk about that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for creating the space.
Yes, and I'm going to be going through some data that I think might help folks to make some decisions on what might inform us as well. Our process in Oakland Rising is we'll go to our partner organizations and to some of our allies and really take a deep dive into the maps to see what will happen, what they think will what we need in Oakland, and we will bring that to the commission. And decide, and hopefully we will get the map that our community is advocating for. But thank you so much, Lily, for joining us.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody that's part of this effort. Really appreciate it. And our outreach consultants that yesterday did say that the outreach effort for this process has higher engagement than when it was done previously. And
That's
so
right.
it's already a big win from that perspective. And so I just want to say thank you to everybody that has participated, and a huge thank you to you, Liz, for your leadership and the entire organization as well, and the different organizations that are represented. This was the time to show up, and we have one more step. So I hope to see you there on December 30th.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much for your work and service to Oakland.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We're all in it together.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. So let's give ourselves a little shoulder roll. That was a lot of maps, y'all. That was a lot. And so thank you all for watching. And I'm going to go through a little bit of data and share with you all what is happening here in terms of really looking at what data is informing us. Some of the, I'm just going to remind folks of Oakland Rising is a collaborative of 9 organizations that include Asian Pacific Environmental Network, Bend the Arc for Jewish Partnerships for Justice, Casa Justa Just Cause, Communities United for Restorative Youth Justice, Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, East Bay Alliance for a Sustainable Economy, Mujeres Unidas y Activas, Parent Voices Oakland, and St. Mary's Center. And as we look at this map here, you'll see this is actually a map that was shared to me by some other coalition partners as we were doing some studying. This is the redlining that we have in Oakland. Green being best, blue being still desirable, orange being definitely declining, and D being hazardous. So this is a map that's sometimes used to redline our neighborhoods. So redlining is when we see banking institutions change or deny home loans, and landlords and developers denying certain people allowed to live in specific neighborhoods. specific neighborhoods, not Pacific. And as you can see in the flatlands down by the 880, this is part of that redlining, the orange being sort of in the middle where it's declining, blue being where it's still desirable. And these, as you can see, as we look at the city, are neighborhoods that are highly gentrified now. And then when we look up here, this is actually sort of the Hills neighborhood up here. A lot of this is empty here on this map because there actually isn't a lot of houses. This is actually East Bay Regional Park. So right on the 580 is mostly where the homes are. So this is actually something that a lot of folks that joined the commission meetings were upset about in terms of what redlining looks like. It happens right on the 880. It happens right at the 580. 580 goes this way. It happens right at the 13th. So the way that freeways, and this is the 980, the way freeways are used to cut our city up has been used against our communities, particularly in Oakland against Black community, and has continued to be the impetus for development. So as you can see here, this is sort of definitely declining areas, and these are the places where you'll start to see a lot more development in order to bring those changes to Oakland. So the next few sets of maps, I want to give a shout out to Asian Law Caucus for assisting with bringing some of these maps for us. I'm actually going to skip the citywide view and just look at our current district lines. As you can see, the current district lines, districts 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7 all have a portion of their district in the hills, what we call the hills, this being the flatlands. It's very distinct physically. It looks like flatlands, and then in the hills, it's very different as well. So this is poverty rates in Oakland. You can see here the bright red patches is 60 to 100%. The more mauve color is 45 to 60%. And then as it lightens more, 30 to 40%, and majority in the hills being 0 to 10 or 10 to 20% living in poverty. And as we move down further, we can see the housing cost burden. And you can see here that in the flatlands in what is D5, D6, and D7, it's much heavier. It's 55 to 100% patches in areas there. And so imagining what that impact is on the communities. And you can see here that there's a huge change between, like, say, let's look just at District 6 and District 7 currently. That in the hills, the housing cost burden is about 30 to 45% here. And then in the flatlands, it's between 45 to 100%. And some places, that is a huge difference. It's between, 10 to, 65% change in terms of who is living with a higher housing cost burden. So I'm realizing that this one doesn't, messed up on the map. So I think I messed up and didn't put the district map in, but you can kind of see here, this is where the foreign-born across the city live in Oakland. And then similarly, it's very similar map is when we look at the limited English proficiency rates. You can see here in D2, this is Chinatown area. This is East Lake and then San Antonio. as we move into the Fruitvale and move down into D6 and 7 to deep East Oakland, you see that population changing more. Up in the hills, that's not necessarily the case. So as we look at some of our voting data here, this is POC voters, people of color voters in Oakland. Again, it's heavily concentrated in the flatlands. There is some movement here in the hills when you move into District 6 and District 7. And historically in Oakland, because of redlining, concentrating Black population in the flatlands, generally in D6 and 7 and in West Oakland. Much of this is actually those who are living in the hills historically are sort of like families who migrated here from the South during and before World War II. And then post World War II, sort of, we saw white flight into over these hills into Moraga, and beyond into Walnut Creek. But we can see here in these areas that these populations are of folks, they didn't want to leave Oakland. They just wanted to, they quote unquote made it, right? They worked really hard in industry, got their kids through colleges, and then their kids, then generations just continued to expand into parts of Oakland Hills. So that's sort of what this is some of that historic knowledge in Oakland. This is the Black voting population. Again, you can see here it's highly focused in the flatlands of D6 and 7 is highly Black from top to bottom. And then there's these pockets in West Oakland as well as in, this is the flatland areas of D1, like Bushrod area. This is the Latinx voters. You can see focused in D5 and growing in D6 and 7. And this is API voters, Asian Pacific Environmental Network, almost said APEN, y'all. Asian Pacific Islanders in Oakland. That there is higher concentrations of them, of API folks in, it's not a huge amount, it's between 10 to 30%, but there's a spattering of folks in the hills. And some of the big differences being, if you compare this to, say, the limited English speaking, there's some of that overlay, but also that it shows that actually we have more Asian Americans, maybe second, third generation living in the hills, but in the flatlands, you have a lot more immigrants. So if we looked at the foreign born, for example, that's reflected there too. And then this is the, API, this is the white voters in Oakland. So you can see there's high concentrations in the hills, and then around, around the Piedmont area towards the lake. And as you can see, West Oakland has become more highly gentrified. And this is an interesting data point about voters who are between age 18 and 35. Again, that the concentration is in the flatlands and not in the hills. It's only majority between 10 to 20% voters are under the age of 35. So this is a data point on Prop 21. This was the renters protection proposition, state proposition in the state that was to try to remove Costa-Hawkins and allow local municipalities to have renter protections. And this is one really clear way to see how Oakland actually votes and whether they actually are looking out for folks. And you remember the cost burden, the high concentrations of folks in the flatlands with housing cost burden. And this is mostly a lot more renters in the flatlands. So let me go back to this data point. You can see here that light colors, 40 to 50%, 40 to 60% in the hills choosing to, I'm sorry, there's pockets here too. Oh, that's Piedmont, of course, Piedmont. We won't focus on them. But there's portions between, that are below 50%, 60% voting no for renters protections. And as you can see in the flatlands, it was high concentrations between 60 to 100%. I'm sorry, between 60 to 80% voting yes for renter protections. And then this is Prop 15. And Prop 15 was ballot measure, state ballot measure called Schools and Communities First. It was a way to restructure our property tax collection to get corporations to pay their fair share in property tax. And it would have changed that. It lost. So it's really nuanced in Oakland, but as you can see, 80 to 100% in West and North Oakland, and pockets of around the lake as well as into Glenview. But majority of the city voted in favor of this. We had 60 plus percent. But you can also see that there was pockets where less folks in the hills voted for this. It's really nuanced, so it might be one of those data points that are a little more washed out. This is S1, which is a city ballot measure that was that was more on focused on in 2018, that was trying to curb do more regulation around the police. And you can see here that the darker areas in the flatlands, this was voted down, the darker areas being who voted for it, and the hills vote less likely to vote for this. This white area is Piedmont, just to focus. And the last thing I wanted to show was sort of displacement of that's happening in Oakland. And the dark purple is advanced gentrification. This is put out by the Urban Displacement Project from their data. And I received this through some of our coalition partners through Oakland Progressive Alliance. And then we have early ongoing is the lighter purple, and the very lightest purple is still at risk for gentrification. And then we see ongoing displacement in like a darker blue, still pale, but the low income susceptible to displacement being light blue. And we can see East Oakland is really highly focused on that. This is showing us that sort of displacement happening. And that it's creeping over to D5, D6, and D7. The other colors on this scale are, there's sort of like pale orange, maybe, I don't know, salmon colors, variations of the three variations of that salmon color being at risk of becoming exclusive, it's becoming exclusive, and stable advanced exclusive. So big parts of the hills are part of that. There's some gray areas which show high student population, which is right around Mills College, which isn't a shock. But this is one of those things that we wanted to show, that folks in the hills aren't worried about being displaced, but in the flatlands, we are definitely worried about that. And so I'm going to stop there and just, I think the next steps that we'll take is, again, Oakland Rising will meet with our coalition partners and our collaborative partners to review K3 and F3 maps and try to decide which one we will be advocating for. And hopefully by next week, we'll be putting out an e-blast to share out which of the maps we would like to advocate for. And we'll have a Monday Meals, which is our Instagram Live Monday event at noon. Next Monday, we will be talking about that. And then again on the Monday before December 30th, on the last day, the last commission meeting, we'll have another event to really push folks out to vote and push the commissioners to vote on a particular map. So hopefully you all will join us. I want to thank Lily Gongas for joining us today to go over where we landed last night and this long, almost 18-month process to get us here. I want to thank all of our interpreters, both Spanish and Chinese, as well as ASL, and our closed captioner for joining us to provide the language and disability access. So let us know. Go to oaklandrising.org. You can check out our blog to see where we land. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can also push that donate button. We will always love for you to support the work that we do. And we will continue to push out. And then also, sorry, follow us on our social media on Facebook and IG and Twitter. Just look for Oakland Rising. And we will be posting on those areas upcoming actions and steps that you can take on redistricting, as well as hear back on where we land on analysis for which map to advocate for. So thank you for your time, everybody. I really appreciate you. We're going to end it a little early tonight, and enjoy your evening. Thank you. I'm going to stop the live. And then I'm going to stop recording.